Hey everyone, welcome to today's Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. My name is Nate Carter, and today we're in Revelation chapter 8. For those of you reading through the Bible reading plan with us, isn't it interesting to be reading Isaiah and Revelation at the same time? I mean, it's heavy stuff. I really have trouble reading it without having some commentary along with it in order to understand, but it's also two prophetic books talking about, in many cases, talking about end times from different perspectives. So it's really fascinating. In Revelation 8, we have this fascinating moment that is described right at the beginning of verse 1. When the Lamb broke the seventh seal on the scroll, there was silence throughout heaven for about half an hour. Imagine that. There's been all this singing, there's been all this shouting and activity, and things are happening, and things are being declared, and then all of a sudden there's this silence. Have you ever been in a large assembly and a moment of silence is called for? I can remember when I was just starting off in ministry, it was a really interesting time because right about my third month of ministry, September 11th happened, and so suddenly everything was changed, and we had this service, special service. I think it was on a Thursday morning, for to remember the victims and to pray for God's mercy. And our sanctuary was filled like it never, I think, never before had been and never again would be. It was filled to brimming over. And in the midst of that, we observed a minute of silence for us to pray silently and to have, that was a huge sanctuary. There were probably over 1,000 people there. To have 1,000 people silent before God was something to behold. How often are you silent before God? I admit that I am not silent as much as I'd like to be, but the times that I am are really beautiful times. And it's not necessarily that in those silent times I'm quietly praying or even hearing God's voice necessarily, but it's just being silent with God and giving our relationship that margin to breathe. And I do believe that when God speaks to us, a lot of times we're only able to hear him when we've created that time for silence. In fact, if you're part of Cornerstone Church this Sunday, I hear there's a guest speaker who's going to be talking about hearing from God. And so you might want to come and hear that message about what it's like to listen for God's voice. A lot of times that involves silence. So then what happens? I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and they were given seven trumpets. And I'm imagining this in my mind's eye, that all this is happening in the midst of silence, that someone's handing trumpets up to these angels, but it's still silent. Then another angel with a gold incense burner came and stood at the altar, and a great amount of incense was given to him to mix with the prayers of God's people as an offering on the gold altar before the throne. I've said this before, but let's not forget that our prayers are like incense before the Lord. And here they're taking on almost a physical sense before God's throne room. That your prayers matter. They bring a fragrance to the Lord. The smoke of the incense mixed with the prayers of God's holy people ascended up to God from the altar where the angel had poured them out. Again, everything's happening in silence. Then the angel filled the incense burner with fire from the altar and threw it down upon the earth, and thunder crashed, lightning flashed, and there was a terrible earthquake. Now imagine, there's just been this time of silence, and your ears start to get used to that quiet. You start to hear that kind of staticky sound in your ears because they're not used to having utter silence. And then out of the midst of that, all of a sudden, there's thunder and there's an earthquake. And you can imagine the deafening sound that would make breaking through the silence. What is that? This is the judgment of God in answer to the prayers of the people that have come up like incense, the prayers of God's people that are crying out for justice from God. And now he's answering that prayer. And he's bringing his judgment on the earth for the wicked deeds that are going on there. What a picture, isn't it? How dramatic this is. I can't imagine this scene, but I do try to play it out in my mind's eye. And it reminds me that we are to be praying for God's judgment. We're to be praying that God's justice would prevail on earth, that at the end of time, he would bring all things to be right again, to be the way that he intended them to be. That's part of our role as followers of Jesus, to pray for justice to be done. It also reminds me that it's not our job to bring God's judgment, that it's his job. Justice is mine, saith the Lord. You got to go King James there. It's God's place to bring his judgment. We stand for God's ways, we follow God's ways, but it's not our job to bring his justice. But take heart, one day he will. So where do we go from here? Today, I invite you to observe some times of silence with the Lord, to just be with him, see what happens. And then I invite you to pray for justice, knowing that although it may not come immediately, one day God's justice will prevail. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you the next time on the Cornerstone Connection.